This is the brief on the Tao of Forecasting. It's an awesome philosophy that turns forecasting from some dry, statistical skill into an active everyday operating system, revealing that every single choice you make is quietly weighing what comes next. First, we need to treat our choices as forecasts. Most of us do this completely unconsciously, but whether you're changing careers or just answering an email, you're actually predicting a possible future. It's honestly like your smartphone running predictive background apps that just drain your battery until you consciously bring them to the foreground. The goal here is to shift from passive expectation to intentional action, mapped right against the science of superforecasting. Second, we've got to talk about atomic forecasting. Instead of making these massive, distant predictions, try creating small, bounded expectations right at the point of action. Now, you might be thinking, wouldn't constantly running these micro-forecasts just cause massive decision fatigue? Well, no way. It actually frees us from the paralyzing pressure of needing absolute certainty. Finally, we bring this all together using the THRIVE learning loop. Target an objective, hypothesize a prediction, reach into reality, investigate the outcomes, validate your evidence, and evolve your judgment. So is this basically the scientific method rebranded for our own personal chaos? For sure, because it shifts your ultimate goal from being right to learning fast. By breaking grand expectations into atomic, testable loops, we transform uncertainty from a paralyzing threat into a continuous engine for learning. You don't need to know the entire future before you move. You just need the curiosity to let reality correct your very next step.
I want you to think about the very last choice you made before pressing play on this deep dive today.
Just that one tiny split-second moment.
Yeah, exactly. Put yourself back in that exact moment. You were maybe, scrolling through your feed on your commute or, I don't know, standing in your kitchen holding your phone.
Right, trying to decide if you had the mental bandwidth for this.
Exactly. You were weighing your options. You hesitated for like a fraction of a second. You looked at the title, and then you committed. You pressed play. But here is the thing. Did you know exactly how this experience would turn out?
You definitely didn't.
Right. Did you have absolute certainty that listening to this specific audio would be like a genuinely valuable use of your time? Probably not. Without even really realizing it, you didn't just make a choice there. You made a forecast.
The underlying mechanics of that moment are just, well, they're incredible because it feels entirely like a binary action while you're living it, right? Play or don't play. It feels clean, almost thoughtless.
Yeah, totally thoughtless.
But beneath that simple tap on a glass screen is a staggering amount of invisible calculus. Your brain was taking past experiences with audio shows, your current mood, your available time, and projecting all of those variables forward.
Like a massive simulation running in the background.
Precisely. You were anticipating a possible future and essentially placing a small bet on it.
And that invisible calculus, that quiet betting system running in the background of your life, is exactly what we're going to expose today. Okay, let's unpack this. We have a genuinely fascinating stack of source material in front of us today.
We really do. It's incredibly rich.
Yeah, we're looking at the Tao of Forecasting Talent Whisperers, alongside some just incredibly foundational concepts from Philip Tetlock and Dan Gardner's renowned book, Superforecasting.
Which is kind of the gold standard in this field.
It really is. And our mission today isn't just to talk about how economists predict inflation rates or the mathematical models that meteorologists use to track a storm front.
Which is what people usually think of when they hear the word forecasting.
Right, exactly. Our mission is to completely rewire how you view your own daily decision-making. We want to transform forecasting from this dry, statistical, spreadsheet-heavy exercise into the core operating system for living a deeply intentional life.
It's about personal application.
Absolutely. And I promise you, even though we are going deep into cognitive science, predictive systems, and behavioral psychology today, this is going to be incredibly relatable. There's no heavy jargon that we don't thoroughly explain. It's just a completely new lens for looking at your daily life.
I mean, it really requires a fundamental paradigm shift in how we define the word itself. Because like you said, we're culturally conditioned to think of forecasting as a highly specialized industry.
Right. Guys in suits with laser pointers.
Yeah, or we picture, intelligence analysts poring over satellite imagery or Wall Street quants running algorithmic models on supercomputers. But the Tao of Forecasting proposes something far more radical. It argues that forecasting is actually a shared foundational behavior across all living systems.
Wow, all living systems.
It's not just a high-level human cognitive function. It is fundamentally biological.
And the sources provide some brilliant grounding examples to illustrate this. I mean, think about a child reaching out to take their very first step across the living room, or a dog at a park, right?
What dog example is perfect?
Yeah, a dog locking eyes with a stranger and deciding in a split second whether to approach for a pet or, retreat behind its owner's legs. Or an antelope in the savannah lifting its head because the grass rustled in a specific, unfamiliar way.
Right. These aren't just mechanical knee-jerk reactions to stimuli. They are active engagements with a possible future before an action is actually taken.
Right.
When an animal moves toward greener vegetation during a drought, it's responding to environmental signals, predicting where water might be, predicting a zone of safety. It's a survival-based operating system for living beings.
So it's basically hardwired into us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we carry that biological imperative up to the level of human consciousness, it means that every single meaningful choice you make is, at its core, reaching toward a possible future.
But we don't really experience it that way, do we? Like, I don't walk around telling myself I'm forecasting my lunch order.
No, of course not. We experience these calculations as intuition, or a stubborn habit, or maybe a sudden flash of fear, or just what we loosely call common sense. To really leverage this operating system, we have to break down the continuum of how these expectations actually operate in our day-to-day lives. And the framework starts right at the baseline, which is the unconscious expectation.
Okay, unconscious. So this is the autopilot mode, the choices we make before we even know we're making them.
Precisely. This is the realm of deeply ingrained experience, rapid pattern recognition, and, biological conditioning. Think about walking down a sidewalk and hesitating right before you cross a busy street because you catch something out of the corner of your eye.
A flash of movement or something?
That's right. You aren't standing on the curb running a conscious probability matrix in your prefrontal cortex about the velocity and trajectory of the oncoming cars. Your brain simply recognizes a threatening pattern based on a lifetime of data, and it sends an immediate signal to stop your feet.
Yeah.
You're forecasting physical danger completely unconsciously, and it literally saves your life.
That makes total sense.
Ah.
Then you step up one level in awareness to the implicit forecast. And this is where the psychology gets a lot stickier, I think. It hits much closer to home for anyone navigating a career or a relationship.
Oh, absolutely. This is where most of our stress lives.
Yeah. The text gives the example of avoiding a difficult conversation. Say, asking your boss for a raise, or confronting a friend who genuinely hurt you because you just expect it to go badly. You aren't sitting at your desk saying, I calculate a 73% probability that my boss will yell at me, resulting in a loss of social standing. But that vague, heavy expectation of failure is entirely driving your choice to stay silent. It's operating in the background, shaping your reality without your explicit permission.
And the mechanics of that avoidance are driven by the fact that the forecast remains totally unexamined. Because you haven't articulated exactly what you're afraid of, the brain just treats the vague feeling of dread as an established fact.
Man, it makes me think of a smartphone. You know that feeling when you pull your phone out of your pocket and it's incredibly hot, the battery's draining rapidly and the screen is lagging?
Oh, yeah, the worst.
When you check your settings and realize you have like 45 different apps running in the background, you haven't actively looked at any of them in days, but they're constantly refreshing, pinging servers, eating up all your processing power, and dictating how your phone performs.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. Unconscious and implicit forecasts feel exactly like those background apps. They dictate what opportunities you notice, what risks you avoid, who you decide to trust, all without you ever putting them on your mental home screen to see if they're actually useful.
Exactly.
But here's where my mind goes immediately, and I have to push back a little on this. Isn't it entirely paralyzing to try and turn every single background app into a conscious, explicit forecast on the home screen? Like if I have to formally forecast the probability of satisfaction every single time I choose a sandwich for lunch, I'm never going to eat. I'll just starve to death analyzing the deli menu.
What's fascinating here is that the framework anticipates that exact exhaustion and explicitly warns against it.
Oh, it does.
Yes. The goal is absolutely not to formalize every minor decision.
Yeah.
That would lead to complete cognitive overload. The human brain uses unconscious forecasting specifically to conserve energy. The goal is to become intensely curious about the consequential decisions.
The ones that matter.
Right. The ones that actually move the needle in your life. This connects deeply to a widely discussed concept in cognitive science called predictive processing. There are influential models of perception that describe the human brain not as a passive receiver of information, but as a continuous expectation generation machine.
Wait, meaning we don't just see what is actually there, we see what we expect to be there.
Exactly. The brain essentially hallucinates a model of reality based on past experiences, and then it uses incoming sensory information from the eyes and ears merely to check its work. It compares the incoming data to what it expected to happen. If there is a mismatch, what scientists call a prediction error, the brain uses that error to update its internal model of the world.
So our biological hardware is literally wired to predict, find the error, and update. It's like a built-in evolutionary learning loop.
Precisely. The Tao of Forecasting isn't asking you to invent some unnatural, robotic new skill. It is asking you to partner with your own biology. It asks you to take the implicit forecasts that genuinely matter, deciding whether to accept a job offer in a new city, choosing to marry someone, launching a new product, and move them into the third category.
The explicit forecast.
Exactly, the explicit forecast. This is where you drag the expectation into the light. You articulate exactly what you believe will happen, on what timeline, and why. Because the moment a forecast becomes explicit and visible, it becomes testable. You can actually examine the evidence supporting it, rather than just being a hostage to the feeling of it.
But realizing that we are biologically wired to forecast doesn't automatically mean we're accurate. Just because my brain expects a conversation to go terribly doesn't mean it actually will.
Right. Human bias is a huge factor.
Yeah. So if we are going to rely on this operating system for the biggest decisions in our lives, how do we actually cross the bridge from unconscious habit to deliberate, accurate skill? I mean, we need a foundational methodology.
Yeah.
And that requires looking at people who do this better than anyone else on the planet, which brings us to the science of superforecasting.
This is where the work of Philip Tetlock and Dan Gardner becomes absolutely essential to our deep dive. Tetlock ran these massive multi-year forecasting tournaments sponsored by the U.S. intelligence community. He tracked tens of thousands of predictions about highly complex geopolitical and economic events.
A massive data set.
Unprecedented. And the very first, most critical concept we have to extract from their research is that prediction is not the same thing as certainty. In our everyday language, we use the words confidence and certainty interchangeably, but in the world of a super forecaster, they are wildly different animals.
We hear it all the time at business, right? Someone stands up in a meeting and says, I am confident this marketing campaign will work. That is such a dangerous phrase because it completely hides the math. Like, what does confident even mean in that context? Are you 51% sure? Are you 95% sure? And more importantly, what specific piece of evidence would actually prove you wrong?
The individuals who emerged from Tetlock's tournaments as super forecasters, people who were consistently, measurably better at predicting global events than actual subject matter experts with access to classified information, they did not possess some mystical clairvoyance.
They weren't psychics.
No, not at all. Their competitive advantage was a highly disciplined relationship with uncertainty. They didn't treat uncertainty as a flaw in their thinking or a temporary lack of information that would eventually be solved. They treated uncertainty as the permanent natural state of the world. It is a landscape to be navigated systematically using a very specific set of core principles. And the first of these principles is triage.
Triage. Yeah, this goes back to our discussion about finite attention. You shouldn't waste your mental energy on the purely predictable or the totally random. Tetlock and Gardner categorize these as clock-like versus cloud-like problems.
It is a vital distinction for directing your focus. A clock-like problem is a closed system governed by strict rules. Knowing exactly what time the sun will rise tomorrow in London is a clock-like problem. You don't need a super forecaster for that. You just need a standard algorithm.
Right.
At the other extreme, a cloud-like problem is an open, infinitely complex system, predicting the exact microscopic shape a specific cloud will take in exactly 3 hours is overwhelmingly, irreducibly uncertain. No amount of cognitive effort will solve it.
Right. If you spend your life trying to predict clouds, you are going to drive yourself insane.
Yes, exactly.
The sweet spot, the place where you should actually spend your finite mental bandwidth, is the territory directly in between the clock and the cloud. This is the space where outcomes are uncertain, but where improved judgment, better data, and careful thinking can actually change your probability of being right.
And once you've triaged a problem and decided it sits in that sweet spot, the next principle is to break the problem apart. You decompose it into smaller, manageable subcomponents. You rigorously separate the things you actually know as empirical facts from the things you're just guessing at based on intuition.
But the principle that fundamentally shifted how I look at my own life, and honestly, the one that causes the most trouble for people on a daily basis, is the concept of the outside view versus the inside view.
Oh, the inside view might be the single most pervasive cognitive trap human beings fall into. We do it constantly and we do it enthusiastically.
We do. We love the inside view because it makes us feel special. Okay, let's really break this down. The inside view is when you look at your specific, unique situation and you base your forecast purely on the details right in front of you. You look at your own intentions, your own skills, and the unique nuances of your project. The outside view, on the other hand, requires you to step back and look at base rates. You have to ask, what usually happens in situations that belong to the same broader category as my situation? Let me give you a highly personal, slightly painful analogy to show how this works. Think about doing a major home kitchen renovation.
A universally understood landscape of suffering and delayed timelines.
Exactly. So let's say I'm doing an inside view forecast. I'm standing in my kitchen with my contractor. I'm looking at the custom cabinets that have already been delivered and are sitting in boxes in my dining room. I've met the contractor. He seems highly competent. He has a great firm handshake.
Very important, the handshake.
Oh, vital. I have a color-coded spreadsheet with every task mapped out. Because I am immersed in the specifics of my own life, my inside view forecast is, my situation is incredibly unique. I am a highly organized person. My contractor is different from other contractors. Therefore, this renovation will absolutely be completed in the 3 weeks he promised.
It feels entirely rational to you because you're only processing the information within the 4 walls of your house. But the outside view demands a completely different perspective.
Right. The outside view requires me to leave my house, ignore my nice contractor, and look at the entire neighborhood. I have to look at every single kitchen renovation done in this city over the last 5 years. I have to look at the statistical base rate. And when I do that, the data shows that historically, these projects almost always take 3 months, and they invariably run 20% over budget.
Yeah.
The foundational rule of superforecasting is that you must start with the base rate, the outside view, to anchor your initial expectations. Only after you have anchored your forecast in the harsh reality of the base rate are you allowed to adjust it slightly based on the specific unique details of your inside view.
The underlying mechanism there is that our own immediate situation always feels exceptionally unique to us because we are living inside it. We have access to all of our own good intentions, but we don't have access to the good intentions of everyone else who also failed to finish their kitchen in 3 weeks.
Right.
The base rate rarely lies. It absorbs all the unexpected delays, the permit issues, the supply chain problems, and it just presents you with reality. Once you've used the outside view to find that anchor, you have to apply the next principle, which is expressing your forecast using degrees of uncertainty. You have to permanently discard vague, protective words like likely, probably, or a good chance.
Because language is so subjective. If we're launching a product and I ask if it'll ship on Friday and you say it's likely, we might walk away thinking we completely agree.
Yeah.
But to me, likely means like a 55% chance, essentially a coin flip. To you, likely might mean an 85% chance, an almost sure thing. We aren't even having the same conversation, and we won't realize it until a project fails. We have to assign actual probabilities.
Assigning a probability forces intellectual honesty. It exposes the gap in our shared understanding, and it sets the stage for the next principle, which is the delicate art of updating without whiplash. A forecast is not a set-and-forget proposition.
No, it's alive.
Exactly. As time passes, new evidence inevitably arrives. When that happens, say, your contractor discovers a massive plumbing issue behind the drywall on day 2, you have to navigate the psychological tension between stubbornness on one side and overreaction on the other.
You don't want to just stubbornly ignore the plumbing issue because you're emotionally married to your beautiful 3-week spreadsheet. But you also don't want to panic, throw out the entire plan, and assume the project is doomed to take 3 years. You have to take the new evidence and adjust your probability incrementally. You update your beliefs in proportion to the weight of the new information.
To do that effectively, you need a specific mental posture, which Tetlock calls having dragonfly eyes.
It's such a brilliant visual metaphor.
It perfectly captures the cognitive flexibility required. An average forecaster forms a theory, and then their brain immediately falls victim to confirmation bias. They start unconsciously filtering the world, only absorbing the evidence that supports the narrative they already built.
Right, ignoring the red flags.
A superforecaster does the exact opposite. They actively, aggressively seek out perspectives that threaten their preferred explanation. A dragonfly has thousands of distinct lenses in its compound eyes. Each lens captures a slightly different angle, a different slice of light. When the dragonfly's brain combines them, it creates a composite image that offers a near 360-degree view of its environment.
Which means, in the context of forecasting, you shouldn't just talk to the people on your team who agree with your strategy. You have to find the smartest person who thinks your idea is terrible and genuinely try to see the landscape through their lens. Many partial and often completely contradictory perspectives, when combined, create a much richer and more accurate view of reality than one beautifully coherent, comfortable narrative that you are just holding on to way too tightly.
And that leads directly to the final and perhaps most unforgiving piece of the superforecasting foundation: keeping score and calibration. If you don't rigorously record your forecasts and your assigned probabilities, your brain will betray you through hindsight bias.
Hindsight bias is the ultimate editor of our personal histories. If I don't write down that I was 90% confident my kitchen would be done in 3 weeks, my memory will shift. 3 months later, when the kitchen is finally finished and I'm exhausted, I will look back and tell myself, you know what? I knew all along it was going to take 3 months. I always felt it.
Right.
My brain protects my ego by rewriting the past to make me look like I was right the whole time.
Keeping a rigorous score prevents that ego protection mechanism from taking over. But keeping score isn't just an exercise in tracking your failures to make yourself feel bad. It is equally important for analyzing your successes. If you predicted the kitchen would be done in 3 weeks and it actually was, you cannot just celebrate and assume you're a genius.
Yes, slow down.
You have to investigate the victory. You have to ask, was it because my outside view reasoning was flawless and my project management was exceptional? Or did my contractor just happen to have a sudden cancellation on another job that freed up his entire crew for my house?
In other words, was the outcome the result of skill, or was it just blind luck masking a terrible forecast? If you don't know the difference, your next forecast is going to be a disaster.
Exactly. So this entire foundation from Tetlock's work shifts our mindset. We move from viewing uncertainty as a terrifying, unpredictable void that we must avoid at all costs to seeing it as a structured landscape that we can navigate with discipline, probabilities, and constant updating.
But if we look closely at the superforecasting model, there's a fundamental limitation when we try to apply it to our daily lives. Superforecasting, by its very nature, is often about observing massive events from the outside. You're a spectator. You predict the outcome of a national election, or the fluctuation of a global currency, or the trajectory of an international conflict. But you don't single-handedly decide the election. Your prediction doesn't change the currency read. What happens when the forecast we were trying to make is about a situation where we are active participants? What happens when our own actions change the very thing we are trying to predict?
That is the crucial pivot point in the source material, and it requires a completely different approach. We have to move from the macro to the micro. This brings us to the concept of atomic forecasting and the edge of chaos. We are stepping away from large, distant, systemic outcomes and moving towards small, highly bounded expectations that exist incredibly close to our own actions and immediate feedback loops.
The source text unpacks this distinction using a deep dive into American football. And I want to really build this out because it perfectly illustrates the shift from spectator to participant. Think about the massive industry surrounding predicting the Super Bowl.
Billions of dollars.
Exactly. A classic super forecaster can sit in an office in July, look at team schedules, analyze historical injury rates, evaluate coaching statistics, and estimate, say, a 15% probability that the Seattle Seahawks will win the championship in 6 months. That is a macro, outside-in forecast. But long before that championship game ever kicks off, there are thousands upon thousands of nested atomic forecasts taking place in real time on the actual grass.
To understand the difference, you have to break down the sheer volume of processing happening on the field during a single 7-second play.
Let's slow it down like a movie scene. The offensive coordinator looks at the field and forecasts what defensive scheme a specific formation will provoke. Simultaneously, the defensive coordinator is forecasting what play the offense is trying to set up based on their substitutions. The players line up, the ball is snapped, the quarterback drops back, reads the defensive lineman, and in a fraction of a second, he forecasts where the free safety is going to rotate.
It's incredible.
At that exact same millisecond, his wide receiver is running a route, predicting how the cornerback's hips will turn when he makes his cut. And that cornerback is simultaneously predicting what both the receiver and the quarterback are trying to create.
It is a dizzying cascade of forecasts nested inside of other forecasts. The grand 6-month Super Bowl prediction is ultimately just a composite made out of season predictions, which are made of game predictions, which are made of drive predictions, all the way down to a receiver predicting a cornerback's next physical step in the dirt. Those micro-interactions are atomic forecasts.
Here's where it gets really interesting and where the Superforecasting spectator model completely breaks down. Because in these atomic environments, the systems are adaptive. Let's say the offensive coordinator correctly forecasts a massive weakness in the defensive line. He calls the perfect play, exploits the weakness, and the team scores a touchdown. His forecast was validated by reality. But here is the million-dollar question. Should he run that exact same play the next time he gets the ball?
Absolutely not, because in an adaptive system, a perfectly correct forecast can instantly make itself obsolete.
The defense just learned. The defensive coordinator just experienced the pain of that touchdown. They adjust their formation. They change the coverage. The environment fundamentally changed because the offense's forecast was correct and acted upon. If the offense just mindlessly runs the play again, relying on past success, the cornerback adapts, jumps the route, intercepts the ball, and the game is over.
This is the mind-bending reality of participatory forecasting. The forecast was entirely correct under the specific conditions in which it was made, but the act of succeeding changed those conditions forever. In adaptive human systems, and this applies whether you're playing a football game, negotiating a corporate merger, or trying to improve communication in a marriage, everyone is forecasting everyone else.
It's a constant dance.
Yes. The future is not a static destination, patiently waiting for one to discover it. It is being continuously and actively shaped by multiple actors who are forecasting, choosing, observing, and updating at the exact same time.
Which means you can't just predict, you have to interact. And this brings us to a concept the text calls the edge of chaos. It sounds dramatic, but it is actually the Goldilocks zone for human progress in forecasting.
It is a concept borrowed from complexity theory. If a system has too much order, if it is rigidly controlled and perfectly symmetrical, it becomes completely predictable. There's no novelty, no innovation, and frankly, nothing new to discover. On the other end of the spectrum, if a system has too much chaos, it is pure randomness. There's nothing to learn there either because no patterns hold long enough to be recognized. Any success is just luck.
Right.
The edge of chaos is the incredibly fertile territory right in between those two extremes.
It's the sweet spot where pattern, feedback, and individual agency coexist productively. It has enough stability that rules and patterns exist, enough uncertainty that the outcome remains genuinely open, enough immediate feedback that we can learn from our mistakes, and enough agency that our individual choices actually matter.
It is the only place where true learning occurs. It's where disruptive startups are born, where breakthrough scientific discoveries happen, and where relationships deepen through vulnerability. But operating at the edge of chaos presents a massive logistical problem.
Because it's moving so fast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we're in an environment that demands thousands of rapid atomic forecasts, we immediately run into a biological wall. Our attention is strictly finite. We simply cannot formally forecast every single variable swirling around us. If we try, we freeze. So the vital question becomes, how do we choose which atomic forecasts actually matter enough to focus on?
If my instinct is to just pick the biggest, most expensive variable and forecast that, the framework suggests that is a massive trap. We need a compass to direct our attention. And the source text provides one by heavily adapting a classic business tool, the 5 whys. But it completely reimagines how and when we use it. Usually the 5 whys as a post-mortem diagnostic tool used after a massive failure.
Right, something goes wrong, you figure out why.
Yeah. A machine breaks on an assembly line, the line stops, and management asks why 5 times in a row to drill down past the symptom and find the mechanical root cause. The Tao of Forecasting flips this timeline. It uses the 5 whys as a pre-forecasting compass to direct our finite attention before we ever attempt to make a prediction.
The necessity of this pre-forecasting step cannot be overstated because if you skip it, you risk falling into what the text calls sophisticated local optimization.
I love that phrase. It perfectly describes the tragedy of doing the completely wrong thing absolutely flawlessly. It means getting incredibly, phenomenally good at forecasting a variable that doesn't actually matter to your ultimate success.
We see this in the corporate world constantly. Imagine an executive team at a massive tech company. They spend 6 months and millions of dollars building a beautiful, complex, AI-driven forecast for next quarter's user growth. They hire the best data scientists, they run thousands of predictive models, they refine their inside and outside views.
The whole 9 yards.
But they haven't stopped to ask the five whys. If they had, they might have discovered that raw user growth is just a surface symptom. By drilling down, they might realize the core problem is that their existing customers no longer trust the product regarding data privacy. That company can predict their user growth flawlessly down to the decimal point, while the entire enterprise slowly goes bankrupt because they aim their magnificent forecasting machinery at the wrong future.
You have to move past the superficial symptom to find the core problem, the core need, the shared core why, and finally, the next move. The text has a fantastic, grounded analogy about a guy wanting to buy a truck that really brings this home. Let's play this out because it shows how much time this compass saves. Imagine a homeowner who decides they want to build a large wooden deck on the back of their house. To build the deck, they need a massive amount of lumber. To haul the lumber from the hardware store, they need a heavy-duty truck. So this person sits down at their kitchen table and spends 3 weeks building an intensive forecast. They analyze future interest rates, they predict depreciation curves on different truck models, they forecast their own household cash flow for the next 5 years to see if they can survive the monthly payments.
It is a massive expenditure of finite cognitive energy, and it's incredibly stressful.
Right, but imagine if, before opening that spreadsheet, they paused and applied the 5 whys as a pre-forecasting compass. You sit them down and ask, why do you want to build the deck? And they say, well, I want a nice outdoor space to host people. You ask, why do you want to host people? Because I work from home, I feel isolated, and I want to feel more connected to my neighborhood. Yeah. Boom. You just hit bedrock. You found the core need, neighborhood connection, and alleviating isolation.
This raises an important question which completely shatters the original premise. Does a $60,000 truck actually solve that core need?
Exactly. You don't need a truck. You might not even need a deck. If the core need is neighborhood connection, you need to invite your neighbors over for a potluck in your living room this Friday night. You just dramatically, beautifully shorten the path to useful evidence. You completely bypassed a massive, expensive, time-consuming forecast by using the 5 whys to find the actual future worth reaching toward.
The compass ensures that we aim our finite forecasting energy only at futures that are actually capable of producing meaningful movement in our lives. And once the 5 whys points us at the right target, the next obvious hurdle is execution. How do we actually take that target and interact with reality at the edge of chaos? This is where the framework introduces its core engine.
We enter the loop. And this is the absolute centerpiece of the whole philosophy. The text refers to it as the Thrive loop. And just so we're clear, this isn't about surviving. It's an engine designed to help you flourish. The Thrive process is a 6-phase continuous growth engine for navigating meaningful objectives when the outcome is uncertain. It's the practical mechanism for moving from observing the future to actively participating in its creation. Let's break down every single phase of this engine, starting with the first one, target.
The target phase asks a very specific question. Based on our compass, what meaningful, right-sized future deserves our attention right now? You've used the 5 whys to find the core need. Now you have to select a specific objective to act upon. And a crucial concept introduced here is constraint theory, originally developed by Eliyahu Goldratt. The principle is that in any complex system, there is always one primary bottleneck dictating the speed of the entire operation. You must aim your target directly at that specific constraint.
To make this tangible, think about a commercial bakery. Let's say you have a team that can mix and prep enough dough for 50 loaves of bread an hour, but your oven can only bake 10 loaves an hour. The oven is the constraint. If you set a target to improve the speed of your prep team by 20%, you haven't helped the bakery at all. You've just created a larger pile of dough sitting in front of a slow oven.
Right, you optimized the wrong thing.
Exactly. Your target must be expanding the oven capacity. But the trick with constraint theory is that the moment you successfully relieve a bottleneck, the constraint immediately moves somewhere else. If you buy a massive new oven that bakes 100 loaves an hour, baking is no longer the bottleneck. Now the constraint is your delivery truck's capacity to distribute the bread before it goes stale. Your next target must move with the new reality.
Which is exactly why targets in the Thrive loop need to be atomic, or right-sized. You do not want to set a massive target that tries to optimize the entire system at once, because the system will shift beneath your feet. You want to make a small, meaningful intervention, observe how the entire system reacts, and see where the constraint moves next. The text references Jim Collins's famous business concept of firing bullets before cannonballs, which is similar to the tech world's idea of minimum viable products. You don't commit massive irreversible resources at Cannonball until you fired a few low-cost, low-risk bullets to calibrate your aim and prove your thesis.
But the Thrive engine adds a really important nuance to the cannonball theory. In traditional business, you fire bullets just to figure out the exact angle to fire the giant cannonball. But in this framework, sometimes the bullet tells you that you don't need a cannonball at all. Or the bullet reveals that the cannonball needs to be fired at a completely different target because the underlying constraint wasn't what you thought it was. The short, rapid nature of the loop ensures that your next target is informed by the actual reality of today, not the outdated assumptions you made yesterday. Which leads us to the second phase, hypothesize.
This is where we take the implicit, vague forecast floating in our heads and force it to become explicit. And there is a very specific linguistic formula the framework provides to do this. If we do X using this vehicle, we expect it to move us toward Y, which is our destination, as measured by Z.
The distinction between the vehicle and the destination is critical.
It is the difference between success and catastrophic failure. The destination is the meaningful outcome you discovered using the 5 whys like neighborhood connection or a profitable product line. The vehicle is merely the temporary approach, the tool, or the project you are currently using to try and get there. Hypothesize forces you to state your causal claim with total clarity. You aren't just making a passive prediction that the weather will be nice. You are making an active prediction that your specific vehicle will cause a specific change in the environment. And this is exactly where you must apply those superforecasting principles we discussed earlier. You bring in the outside view to check base rates, you break the problem apart, and you assign a percentage of confidence to your hypothesis rather than hiding behind words like likely.
So, we have carefully selected a target, and we have mathematically structured our hypothesis. Now we hit the friction point. We reach the third phase of the loop, reach. And this is where the Thrive process fundamentally departs from traditional geopolitical forecasting. Because a super forecaster makes a prediction about an election, registers their confidence level, and then sits back on their couch to watch the news and see if they were right. The reach phase requires actual intervention. You take your fragile hypothesis, you take your vehicle, and you force it into contact with reality. And to be effective, this action has to be a stretch challenge.
The psychology of the stretch is vital here. It connects directly to Lev Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development.
Right.
If your reach involves no stretch, if you're just executing a task you already know you can do flawlessly, you are operating in your comfort zone. You are being productive, but you aren't generating any new evidence about your own capacity or the system's limits. You aren't learning. On the other hand, if the stretch is impossibly large, like trying to run a marathon having never jogged a mile, you're in the panic zone. You will simply fail catastrophically, and the only thing you will learn is that you aimed too high, which often leads to psychological retreat and learned helplessness.
The sweet spot is the right size reach. It stretches your capability just far enough into the uncertainty of the edge of chaos to create new evidence, build new physical or mental capacity, and keep your motivation high. It feels slightly uncomfortable, but entirely possible. You forecast and then you act. And the moment you act, reality immediately starts pushing back. Which brings us to phase 4, investigate.
Reality answers your action, and the investigate phase asks how carefully you're willing to listen to that answer. This phase doesn't just happen at the end, it can happen while the reach is still occurring in real time. What parts of the system are moving as predicted? What is completely resisting your vehicle? This is where you deploy your dragonfly eyes. You look at the cold, quantitative data on the dashboard, absolutely. But you also walk down the hall and talk to the person on your team who vehemently disagreed with the approach from day one. You ask what actually happened, why they think it happened, and what underlying invisible assumption shaped your vehicle in the first place.
You are moving past the binary question of, did it work? And actively investigating the mechanics beneath the result, which naturally bleeds into phase 5, validates. Did the evidence actually prove what we confidently thought it proved?
And this requires a much deeper level of honesty than just checking a box. Validation requires you to ruthlessly distinguish between 3 different layers of success: tactical accuracy, causal effectiveness of the vehicle, and strategic progress toward the destination.
This is a huge, dangerous trap in both business and personal life. The text points out that you can have a forecast that is perfectly tactically accurate. Your team hit the quarterly sales metric right on the dollar, but your vehicle was terribly destructive. Imagine a sales team that hits their quota by aggressively overpromising features to clients and burning out the engineering team. You validated the metric, you got the tactical win, but you completely failed the destination because you destroyed client trust and employee retention in the process. Alternatively, you could achieve a great result, but realize upon validation that your vehicle had absolutely nothing to do with it. You just got incredibly lucky because a competitor went out of business that same week. Validation forces you to strip away your ego and be honest about why you succeeded or failed.
Because if you attribute a success to your own brilliance when it was actually just market luck, your next reach will be wildly overconfident and likely end in disaster. A Breyer score, which is the mathematical formula used to measure a forecaster's accuracy over time, can tell you if your prediction hit the mark, but it cannot tell you if the objective was actually worth pursuing or if your methods were sound. Validation asks if you actually advance toward the larger, meaningful destination. And once you have that honest answer, you enter the final phase of the engine. Evolve.
Now, I have to push back on the concept of evolve. The text talks about living in perpetual beta, constantly updating and changing. Does evolve just mean we lack conviction? Does it mean the second we encounter friction, fail a loop, and realize our hypothesis was wrong, we just abandon our goals and pivot to something easier? Because that just sounds like an excuse for quitting.
That is a very common misinterpretation, and it is exactly why the framework is so rigid about separating the destination from the vehicle in the hypothesize phase. You can stay fiercely, stubbornly, even obsessively committed to your larger destination, say, building a healthy company culture, or raising a resilient child while holding your specific vehicle incredibly lightly.
Oh, I see.
Evolve means your vehicle might change based on the evidence. Or maybe you realize the system's constraint shifted, so your next target needs to move. But on a much deeper level, evolve is about evolving how you learn.
Oh, wow. It's not just updating the spreadsheet, it's meta-learning.
Exactly. Over the course of running dozens of these loops, you start to notice patterns in your own cognition. You might realize that you consistently underestimate how long creative tasks take by about 30%. Or you might learn that when you feel absolute chest-thumping certainty about a decision, it's actually just your ego masking a deep fear of being wrong. Evolve means updating not just your specific forecast about a project, but the very process and algorithms by which your brain makes judgments. You become a better forecaster of your own internal biases.
Target, hypothesize, reach, investigate, validate, evolve. And then, armed with a slightly better map of reality and a slightly upgraded brain, you loop again. It is a stunningly practical, robust way to navigate complex projects and personal goals. But here's the wrinkle that we have to address. The Thrive loop works beautifully when you are forecasting a relatively inanimate project, a product launch, a software update, a household budget. But what happens when the future you're trying to forecast heavily involves the reactions of other human beings? Humans aren't software. They're messy. They adapt. They hold grudges. They actively hide their true motives.
This takes us out of project management and into the highly complex realm of participatory forecasting, or forecasting others. The central premise here is that if we want to accurately forecast human behavior, we cannot just look at what people do. We aren't just forecasting observable actions. We have to forecast what they fear, what they deeply value, what they expect from us, and what fragile things they hope to protect.
Because if we just rely on observing past behavior, we completely miss the underlying motivation driving the behavior. The source text brings in Clayton Christensen's famous jobs to be done theory to explain this, and it's a brilliant application. The theory argues that you have to look beneath the superficial, observable choice to figure out what actual progress a person is trying to make in their specific, messy circumstances.
To visualize this, let's go back to our football field analogy. You are watching a game and you see a wide receiver sprinting down the sideline on a very specific deep route. The observable surface-level behavior says, his job is to get open and catch the football. But if you truly understand the offensive scheme, you might realize his actual job to be done on this specific play has nothing to do with catching the ball. His job is to draw the safety away from the middle of the field, sacrificing his own stats so a different receiver can get open underneath for the touchdown. If the defense forecasts his intent based only on his surface behavior running fast down the sideline, they follow him, leave the middle open, and get burned.
It applies to everything in human interaction. A voter casting a ballot for a specific candidate might appear to be voting based purely on a stated economic policy. But if you dig deeper into their context, their actual job to be done might be preserving a sense of community identity or protecting their autonomy against perceived overreach. If their circumstances change, they might make a completely different, seemingly contradictory choice, but one that still perfectly serves that same underlying job. But this brings up a huge practical problem. How do we possibly know someone else's hidden internal motivations or their specific job to be done? We aren't mind readers.
We aren't, which means observation is insufficient. The framework introduces a mechanism called curiosity reciprocity. Since we cannot simply look at someone and see their internal landscape of fears and incentives, we have to use genuine curiosity to draw it out. We have to ask, what does this specific situation look like from where they're standing? And this is crucial. That does not mean asking, what would I do if I were in their shoes? It means asking how they experience this reality from their own unique perspective, constrained by their own fears, their own history, and their own incentives.
Wait, if I am in a tense negotiation with a business partner or having an argument with my spouse, isn't this curiosity reciprocity just a sneaky psychological tactic? Like if I act super curious and validate their feelings, they will drop their guard, and then I can manipulate the interaction to get exactly what I wanted all along.
The text strongly refutes that approach. If it is deployed as a tactic, it will almost certainly fail because humans are incredibly attuned to inauthentic manipulation. It has to be genuine curiosity, and here is the mechanism of why it works. Genuine curiosity requires vulnerability. It requires allowing the information that we learn to fundamentally change us, too. It is a model of influence without control. If I am truly genuinely curious about why you hold a certain opposing position, I might uncover a legitimate fear you have, or a piece of critical evidence you hold that I had totally missed in my own forecast.
Right, because of my inside view bias, they might possess the exact missing piece of the puzzle that proves my vehicle is flawed.
Exactly. And human nature is deeply reciprocal. When someone feels genuinely heard and understood, rather than managed or argued with, they're often compelled to reciprocate that curiosity. Their biological defense mechanisms lower, and they become curious about how you arrived at your view. And the moment that mutual curiosity is established, the entire forecasting environment changes. By engaging with genuine curiosity, you don't just predict the interaction better. You fundamentally change the interaction. You alter the edge of chaos. You change what futures are actually possible between the two of you.
That is participatory forecasting in its purest form. It's not about predicting what someone will do, it's about co-creating what happens next. We've looked at forecasting the physical world and we've explored forecasting others. But the deep dive doesn't end there because the text argues that the most consequential, the most frequent, and often the most wildly biased forecasts we ever make are not about the economy or our bosses. They are the forecasts we make about ourselves.
This is perhaps the most profound shift in perspective offered in the material. Think about the internal monologue, the statements we make to ourselves all day long. I can't do this presentation. They won't understand my idea. I am not the kind of person who takes risks. I always fail at these types of challenges. We say these things in our heads, and we treat them as if they are immutable, objective facts of physics.
But they aren't facts. They are forecasts. They are predictions about a future state.
Exactly. They are self-forecasts. And like any forecast made by the brain's predictive processing engine, they are based on a data set of evidence. But we have to stop and ask, where did that specific evidence come from, and how old is it? The framework categorizes our inner voices as learned priors. We all have saboteurs. These are the cautionary, fearful, limiting voices that try to keep us small and safe. And we have allies, the supportive, optimistic, encouraging voices. Both of these voices exist for a reason. They carry evidence that was learned in a past environment where it was likely very useful.
Yes. The text points out the tragic flaw in this system. The environment where the forecast was originally learned and validated may no longer be the environment in which it is currently being applied. This is huge for personal development. Imagine you were harshly ridiculed by a teacher for speaking up with a wrong answer in class when you were 10 years old. Your saboteur experienced that pain and learned a very clear predictive rule. Speaking up in front of authority equals humiliation and loss of safety. Fast forward 30 years. You are sitting in a corporate boardroom, you are an expert in your field, you have a brilliant idea to solve the company's problem, and that exact same saboteur screams in your head, "Don't speak, They won't understand you'll be humiliated.
The saboteur is trying to protect you, but it is offering you a terrifying forecast based on a 30-year-old data set from a fifth-grade classroom. It is completely misapplied to the boardroom.
So what does this all mean for us practically? Does it mean the inner critic is just a liar? Is it just offering a poorly calibrated, outdated weather report from a decade ago that we should completely ignore?
It means we shouldn't treat the saboteur's voice as an absolute, undeniable truth, but we also shouldn't attempt to completely suppress or banish it. The psychological goal is calibration, not suppression. The saboteur, despite its outdated dataset, might actually be noticing a real, present risk in the boardroom that deserves your attention. Maybe the CEO is in a terrible mood, and it's genuinely a bad time to pitch a risky idea. And frankly, we have to calibrate the ally, too. The ally might be dangerously overconfident, pushing you to take a massive financial risk that you aren't actually prepared for just because it feels good and optimistic.
Right, toxic positivity and blindly trusting the universe can be just as poorly calibrated and destructive as crippling self-doubt. Both extremes lead to terrible forecasts.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Thrive engine gives us the exact mechanical tool we need to handle this internal conflict. When that inner voice says, "I'll embarrass myself if I share this idea," you use the engine to strip the emotion away and turn it into an explicit hypothesis. You say, "I currently expect that if I share this idea, they may not understand it, and here's the specific evidence why." Suddenly, you have extracted the forecast from your core identity. It is no longer a permanent fact about your worth as a person. It is just a hypothesis sitting on the table in front of you. It gives you the emotional distance to examine it, test it, and update it rather than just blindly obeying it.
And then you move to the reach phase. You design a right-sized challenge. You don't pitch the idea to the terrifying CEO right away. You share a small part of your idea with one trusted colleague over coffee. Put the vehicle in motion and let reality answer. You investigate. Maybe they do understand it completely. Maybe the saboteur's 30-year-old forecast was wrong. By running these right-sized challenges through the loop over and over, we build what the text beautifully calls learned resilience. We accumulate brand new, updated evidence about our own capabilities in our current environment. Confidence stops being this magical, hollow, positive thinking that we have to manufacture in a mirror every morning, and it becomes a hardened, evidence-informed self-forecast.
You literally build a new base rate for your own identity. You prove to your own nervous system through empirical evidence that you can engage with the uncertainty of the world, survive the friction, and learn from it. You overwrite the old code.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with the unconscious biological choices of an antelope. We moved through the rigorous statistical disciplines of superforecasting. We dove into the atomic feedback loops of the Thrive engine, and we ended up navigating the ghosts of the voices inside our own heads. If we boil all of this down, what is the ultimate takeaway from the Tao of Forecasting?
It brings us back out of the theory and into the profound, everyday reality of how we choose to live. The text suggests that a meaningful, flourishing life isn't just shaped by 2 or 3 massive cinematic decisions like who you marry or what career you choose. A life is actually built and shaped by thousands of thoughtful, atomic answers to a single recurring question. Where should I invest the next small portion of myself, and what do I forecast that investment will make possible?
The next small portion of myself. I love the scale of that. It removes the paralysis. You don't have to perfectly predict the next 10 years of your life or the global economy. You just have to use your compass to find a meaningful target, build a thoughtful hypothesis, reach into the reality of today, and let the evidence evolve your next step.
And the framework leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over as we go about our days. In our muted culture, changing your mind is almost universally viewed as a weakness. It is framed as an admission of defeat, a lack of conviction, or a sign of untrustworthy inconsistency. But what if we use this operating system to completely invite that cultural narrative? What if, starting today, changing your mind in the face of new evidence simply becomes the ultimate proof that you are on a continuous, courageous journey of learning? What if updating your forecast isn't a failure, but the very definition of human growth?
That is a phenomenal, liberating place to land. It completely reframes how we interact with the fear of being wrong. Remember that choice you made at the very beginning of this deep dive, that tiny implicit forecast you made right before you press play, hoping this would be worth your time. Well, reality has answered. You reached, you investigated, and you have the evidence now. The only question left is, how will this experience change your next forecast? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, don't let your saboteurs run your background apps, and keep reaching into reality.